what we're going to do right now is we're going to dig in and look at the organizational and industry level about what companies and organizations are doing to reduce and deal with any threats of mental health issues, particularly teen suicide. We're going to have, again, like I said, I'm going to moderate this. We're going to have Scotty Hune from Crisis Text Line, Rachel Madden from YouTube, Christian Crumlish from 7 Cups, Amanda Southworth from Anxiety Helper and Arena, and lastly, Jeff Collins, who we know from After School. So if they all just come to the stage, and we're just going to jump right into this conversation. Yeah, please welcome them. Oh, sorry. All right. Oh, wherever you want to be. Sure, be right there. That might mean you have to start us off. I think that's the joys. I think that's the joys of sitting at the end. And like I said, we're going to be looking at what's going on in the space, dealing with the intersection of technology and mental health. And particularly, and I think this is where it might get interesting and have some debate, some of the challenges that we see from a company level, like YouTube and other companies like After School, and then what we're doing and what we're seeing, any trends that we might be seeing. So our first question, really anybody can start us off. Scotty, you can start us off, or anybody else can jump in, and we can have kind of a free-flowing conversation with this. Our first one is, what have you observed in your work or on your company's platform when it comes to suicide and the mental health of teens? Who wants to start us off with that question? Scotty, you want to, since you?
I can go. Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Sure. So a little background on Crisis Text Line. We're a 24-hour crisis intervention system. So similar to a suicide hotline that somebody would call into, we're conducted entirely through text messaging. We're 24/7, anonymous, free to use. And what makes our service really unique is that we have this tremendous source of data, rich data on mental health and crisis in America. And at any time we can sort of get into the pulse of certain issues and where they're occurring, how they're occurring, what other issues are coming up. And to the issue of suicide, we're able to really understand sort of what issues are co-occurring with suicide, what the trends are among demographics, time of year, seasonality. We see that our rates of suicide spike on our platform in the sort of April, May, so like the end of school year and the beginning of the school year in September and August. And our hope is that our learnings from suicide can be then taken to policymakers, taken to schools, to inform outreach, to inform proactive approaches towards suicide, instead of just using the data that we are able to see on our platform.
Okay. And Rachel, what about you from YouTube's perspective? Obviously, that's a very a lot of media attention lately with YouTube, and then the connection between suicide and as a social media platform.
Yeah, I think people come to YouTube, and what we value and appreciate about YouTube is that people come there to share their story, to talk about their experiences, to give their opinions on different things. No matter what your wonderful or weird interest is, you're probably going to find somebody on YouTube who shares that interest and might be able to offer a supportive voice and so on. But I think one thing that's important about the platform is that we do have rules and policies that govern what is or is not allowed. And while we try to allow as much content as possible on the platform, it is a balancing act, and we're always looking for ways to do more and to better meet the needs of our users. And I think that's why events like this are so great, and why we really appreciate being invited and being able to be here, because we get to hear from young people, we get to hear from educators, get to hear from researchers who can give us so many great suggestions and tips. We often get a lot of great advice at these kinds of events, and it really helps us to learn about how people feel about the product on the ground and how they're using it, and bring that back to our engineering teams and our product teams to help inform us as we roll out new features and new policies.
I'll give you a specific example if you don't mind. I remember a few years ago, there was a trend that received some media attention. It was called the "Am I Pretty" videos that were popular primarily with teen girls on YouTube, and that was basically the idea where a teen girl will go on YouTube, look at the camera, and say, "Am I pretty?" And you could imagine from a question like that, the comments weren't always uplifting, to say the least. So how do you take an issue like that? I mean, is this something where you look at that fine balance of content moderation? Obviously, content moderation is a very delicate issue. Different social mores across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we kind of take a two-pronged approach to it, which is we use both machine learning technology and technology to try to detect and find this content quickly, but then we also use human reviewers, and we need human reviewers because they can look at context and they can understand the different contexts of different videos. So obviously these are tough challenges, and we think people would love us to go back or to try the model of reviewing all content before it goes live, but with 400 hours of video uploaded to YouTube every minute, that is really, really difficult. And so we are dedicated to trying to find solutions to quickly and efficiently review this content. And we've trained reviewers around the world who are online 24/7. So when videos like that are flagged to us or comments are flagged, they're there to review it quickly and make the best decision.
Okay. Yeah, and that's obviously something to kind of think about. And we saw kind of a related topic with Facebook hiring some of their human moderators. Samantha, from your perspective, what are you kind of seeing from a student perspective with this kind of intersection of mental health, suicide at the larger kind of end in technology? We just saw from the teen panel about, does this increase or our levels of anxiety, or is that something that's not kind of causally related?
Yeah. So, well, for those of you that don't know, I'm 16 and I'm also an iOS developer. So I've run a mental health app for about 3 years. So I do a lot of work with teenagers, and I do a lot of work with people in the field, a lot of one-on-one and also online communications. And something that I've noticed about teens and stress and social media is that teens are in a very stressful time right now. I mean, they're planning for their careers. They're figuring out their sexuality. They're doing all of this other stuff, and they have extra societal pressures. And social media can really exacerbate that. I mean, when you don't know who you are, and then you go on social media and you see all of these people just having fun and being happy with themselves and being complacent in their lives and content, it's really hard for teens to not feel like, I want that and I need that, and that's what I need to be happy.
Yeah, and that's kind of the idea what we talked about with Instagram envy. And as we heard some of the speakers talk about before, how we kind of surround ourselves potentially with friends, but not having somebody if we had something serious like a car accident or cancer. So, Jeff, what about yourself? What are you seeing with after school?
So, again, you're going to hear some of the backstory about after school at lunch, so I won't go too much into that. But I'll mention that something somewhat unique about after school is that it's a social network for high school students where they can communicate with other students at their particular high school, and they can also communicate anonymously. As Rachel touched on, we similarly have both the technical and human moderation. But what we see that I think is important and touches on Amanda's comment is that because you can be anonymous, we see that teens will talk about things they're unlikely to talk about in other places where people have these carefully curated identities. And so that means talking about issues like depression or difficult issues like pregnancy or coming out. And what I would say, we really see three things from that. One is it allows users to see that other people are experiencing similarly tough issues. So in that way, it can serve as kind of an antidote to some of the other networks. Two, we usually almost always see positive responses, people trying to buck up their peers. And then three, and this goes to kind of a later part of our discussion, tying into Scotty, what we do through our moderation is we detect people who might be having a mental health issue, and we give them the opportunity to connect to crisis text line. And we've referred tens of thousands of young people and to professionally trained counselors. And so this is kind of a real area of promise, I think.
Yeah, and as some of the earlier speakers talked about, right, how we present ourselves online might be a little different than how we might privately communicate online, something that's maybe less public. We're thinking about our digital footprint, not necessarily our mental health. So, Christian, from your perspective, tell me a little bit more about 7 Cups and
Sure.
some of the stuff you're seeing.
Yeah, and I think I can connect to a couple other things people are saying as well. So, for people who don't know, 7 Cups is a service. The primary offering is anonymous peer support, one-on-one chats, group chats, and online community. We also offer professional therapy, a paid tier. We refer people in crisis and expressing, active suicidality to more qualified services for that sort of thing. So it's also part of a triage model of task shifting in the healthcare world to get sort of the people who need clinical intervention, that sort of help, and the people who need help with their wellness or maintenance of their well-being, or even maintenance of chronic mental illness, but day-to-day maintenance. That's more the tier of support that we're offering for people. Among the teens on our service, probably the unique issue that they have different from the adults. So everybody who says I have stress, have anxiety, have depression, I mean, those are the top things across the board. But bullying is on the teen list, where maybe something like work stress or relationship stress might exist for adults somewhere in a similar tier. I think the anonymity that we have is probably a key part of the social design of the whole environment. I think it connects to what you're saying about after school, at least the anonymous option there, because in some ways it flips the script on that FOMO, fear of missing out phenomenon that the teens were talking about. And I think it's pretty well attested to. You hear, we've all been on Facebook, we probably all know what this feels like, which is you see everybody else's shiny exterior, you have access to your not always perfectly shiny interior, it has dark places in it or whatever, and you compare yourself and you go, well, they're surfing and they're at a wedding and they're in Hawaii and I'm sad and have homework, or whatever is the moment, and you have that feeling over and over again. And occasionally you perform your own happy moments for other people, but that just sort of contributes to the same dynamic, because you're not that way all the time. But you're building up a personal identity around your actual name, so you don't want to advertise I had a panic attack, as one of the teens mentioned, or I'm feeling vulnerable, or please bully me and make fun of me now that you know what my weaknesses are, and things like that. Anonymity and some of the other sort of the moderation and the structural things in the way that 7 Cups work really are designed to reverse that entire dynamic entirely, so that people, knowing that what they say is not going to be added to their permanent record in some sense, can talk about their most difficult, personal, most vulnerable feelings, and get support from other people. And then the phenomenon for everybody else is to see that they're not alone, that other people have the same interior they have, that they also suffer, that they're also lonely. Teens are not the only lonely people in America or on planet Earth. Everybody's lonely. It's a super lonely place these days, and it doesn't matter how many friends you have on Twitter or people all around you in the moment. People feel lonely and disconnected. So anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent. But one other thing about suicide, I just want to say anecdotally, I know so Laura Gregorio was supposed to be here. She had a minor kind of sports accident, but had to get in to see the doctor today. And she runs our clinical, she's a trained psychologist and could speak more to that type of things. I'm the head of product, so I can talk more about how things work and why. And I'm also concerned with growth and traffic and all those sorts of things. And I look at our data, and one day I saw we were having a big spike on the app. I was like, what's going on? And typically you can go into Google Analytics and see that you're getting someone you got written up in the Atlantic, or there's an article on you somewhere, and you're getting a bunch of new traffic that day. But it wasn't really, it seemed buried in there. It seemed like maybe it was coming from Twitter, because we get some traffic from Twitter all the time, but that seemed to be higher than usual. So then I looked to see if some super famous person on Twitter had mentioned us, and that was not true. But then digging a little bit deeper, what I found out was that K-pop star Jonghyun Kim had committed suicide and had written an incredibly poignant letter from the point of view of somebody who'd been suffering with suicidal thoughts and had sought help from a doctor who told him that it kind of was his fault, and he couldn't be cured or something like that, and made all kinds of preparations for his friends and celebrated all their birthdays before he killed himself, and did this ritual that a lot of other teens, it turns out, could relate to in a scary way. And a lot of them, their reaction is to say, if you feel, I look to you when I feel sad. You look so beautiful when you dance. I'm a pop star fan, but I have a little bit of that. It's in my future stuff. But the gist of it was that if you can't handle, if you checked out, what does that mean? And a lot of them express a desire, like, I want to follow you or something like that. And the thing is, so suddenly we have a whole bunch of Korean-speaking users on our app because people on Twitter recommended it. And they had used it before, And it just became a word of mouth phenomenon. People who are known in that world were recommending it, and there was an article in Malaysia, and it kind of picked up again. But all we needed to do really was throw up a couple alerts and threads saying, this news alert, this pop star died. If you're having trouble, here's the place to gather. And the Korean speakers found each other and offered each other support and said, I just joined to get support. I just joined to give support. And while we're not equipped to help people who are feeling suicidal in the moment, the whole surrounding thing of approaching that or feeling in despair or worrying about this or having it even in your mind, that we can help with, and anyway, that
sure
comes back to it.
Okay. Yeah, and then you mentioned, Christian, the product kind of design, and that's the hot topic right now with social media platforms. As I mentioned kind of earlier, we had that recent announcement, that's potentially pretty monumental, of Mark Zuckerberg talking about 2018 being the year that we should try to have meaningful type of interaction online. Obviously, certain people might be skeptical of that statement, maybe think it's more PR, but I guess we'll find out. I think the tension, somebody like Google and YouTube could attach. This is the question, right? How do we strike that balance between engagement, user engagement, and the mental health of users, as we talk about with how social media might impact users? And what I'm getting at is a lot of the Facebook pushback was dealing with maybe internal research which was showing prolonged use and how it might adversely impact some of its users. The criticism from certain people about Zuckerberg's decision would deal with, well, is that going to be then bad for the company, for Facebook? Are you going to be decreasing the engagement? Because what if internally it's showing that, quickly said, miserable people might spend more time on a platform when social media typically is based on a freemium type of model where the pressure is on increased user engagement? How do you kind of strike that balance? So specifically, and Jeff, maybe we'll start with you. How do companies see their kind of role right now with promoting teen mental health and wellness? Because maybe before it went from like a hands-off libertarian type of approach, but now it seems like there's a lot more public pressure on social media companies to do something.
So I think that many of the social media companies have for quite a while focused on online bullying and cyberbullying. So there's been a lot of work on online safety. As Rachel and I both mentioned, technical moderation and human moderation.
Mm-hmm.
And as a teen network, we kind of err on the side of keeping more things down. One of the challenges I'll just briefly mention and then get to the question more directly is teen language is difficult to decipher because it's nuanced, it's acronyms, it's GIFs, and so we are always trying to stay in touch. We have high school interns. We're always trying to adapt and improve our technical and human moderation, but that's a challenge. But more directly to your question, what we've done, and I think other companies are doing this too, is we're focusing more on digital citizenship, which is looking at this issue more holistically, and instead of just kind of block bullying, have these online bullying campaigns. And of course, many of you, everyone here probably knows, most kids aren't even using the term bully. So we're trying to put things in our app that encourage high school students to get involved in social change campaigns, environmental awareness campaigns, register to vote. And we do this with partners like DoSomething.org, Countable.us. The challenge here is we are not a civic engagement app. We are, an app to help to allow kids to share and talk to one another. So we try to integrate these things in a way that is somewhat subtle and is not as in your face, because we all know from our own experience that like a CDC campaign, like this is your mind on drugs, is not that effective. So our creative team spends a lot of time thinking about how we can influence people positively to be good digital citizens. Mm-hmm. That's something that's evolving, but I think that's kind of the trend I see.
Okay. And Rachel, what about yourself from YouTube's perspective? We recently saw Google launching the Be Internet Awesome campaign with the connection of ConnectSafely and the Family Online Safety Institute. So what are you kind of seeing from Google or YouTube specifically standpoint about the responsibility towards mental health?
I think there's a couple of things that we do to try and help with mental health teens, and I look at it kind of with two prongs. So I look at the things that we do in the platform, our features, our operations, and then I look at the campaigns and the projects that we can help support. So within the platform, within YouTube itself, we have things like we'll show one box for certain suicide-related queries that has an SMSS phone number and the crisis text line text option. For users that flag content for suicide or self-harm, we send them a message as well to thank them for flagging this difficult content to us and to also provide them with resources, because I don't personally, in my personal use of YouTube, stumble across a lot of this content. So we figure that if you're finding it and flagging it, maybe you're looking for it and maybe you also need some support. And then I also mentioned our policies. We work with experts to try and make sure that these policies are in the best place and taking into account, someone's potentially in a very vulnerable state, and how do we take that into account when we're enforcing our policies. And then when it comes to projects and campaigns, there's a couple of things that I was thinking about as I was thinking about this panel. There was a couple of years ago the It Gets Better campaign. I don't know if anybody remembers that. But that video is from Dan Savage, who's quite shocked and sad about the number of LGBTQ teens who were committing suicide. And he uploaded this video with a powerful message of, it gets better. And that has over 2 million views on YouTube. There were over 50,000 other videos uploaded. And a lot of people mentioned, there could be celebrities uploading it or people on the public eye, but a lot of regular users and people who aren't in the public domain mentioned that people reached out to them and confided in them. And I think that's a pretty cool way that technology is being used to save lives and to help people who feel isolated. And then we also have, it's slightly off topic, but Creators for Change. This is a program that we launched in 2016, and we're basically trying to work with creators to help them as they use their voice and their YouTube channels to tackle really difficult social issues. So they try to promote tolerance and understanding and empathy, usually around hate speech or xenophobia or terrorism, but it's a really cool example of how I think creators are using their voice to maybe show the world or show their fans a different perspective about something, or a different opinion about something, or open up their mind to something new.
Yeah, and as we kind of touch upon this idea of moderation as well, I think sometimes from an outside perspective, it seems simple. Hey, why don't we have less hate online? Why don't we have more positivity online? Be kind, put a bumper sticker on your car and it's all good. As we know from the actual logistic standpoint, it's not always as simple. One interesting kind of phenomena that I mentioned kind of earlier that I'd like to discuss is this concept of digital self-harm or self-cyberbullying, just to really showcase how thorny some of these topics is or are. So a recent study by the Cyberbully Research Center that collected a national sample of 5,700 middle and high school students, they found that up to 6%, interestingly enough, more men than female engage in this concept of digital self-harm, and that would be sending yourself messages saying kill yourself. And this happened in a few kind of infamous situations. I think that shows you maybe again how difficult this can be to spot. So Scotty, I'd love to kind of hear from you if you wouldn't mind. How do we deal with a topic that is so nebulous and so difficult sometimes to understand, right? We can say that social media is impacting our behavior dramatically, but we don't necessarily know how it's impacting it.
I'd say step one, which is probably speaking to why the 5 of us on our panel are here now, is that there needs to be a tight feedback loop between all 5 of our companies, which is to say that we all interact with users at a different stage in their own mental health life cycle. And we do the best when we're all talking to each other, learning from each other, and feeding each other's insights into each other's platforms. So in hearing about YouTube, thinking about how users from YouTube, for example, will end up at crisis text line. And we'll be working with those users to get them from a crisis moment to a cooler calm. But we'll be learning stuff in those conversations that can then be fed back into YouTube's platform. So for example, YouTube could then think about how they could proactively reach out to users and look for different terms relative to interventions. So really knowing that we all see users at different times, but using that that large knowledge base together, we can actually reach more of the users who are in crisis quicker and make, I think, all of our platforms stronger together. Speaking specifically to self-harm, what we see on our platform is about 15% of our conversations talk about self-harm. And among our youngest users, so we see 75% of our users are under the age of 25, but particularly with that 13 and under group, we see that self-harm over-indexes. So about 20% of our users who are 13 and under are having conversations about self-harm. And really working to understand where are those conversations coming from, what other topics, trends, hour of day, timing, all the different characteristics of these conversations, and trying to feed it back into the public domain. So that as a mental health community, we can all learn from those trends and try to be more proactive about outreach.
So why do you think something like self-harm exists? And maybe Amanda, you like to chime in on this, right? I know it initially got popularized by social media researcher Dana Boyd in 2010, and she kind of speculated that maybe it was a cry for help. It was a way to kind of position yourself, and that maybe there's some kind of relationship between that behavior. Yeah. So Amanda, and then we'll go to Christian.
So I think that digital self-harm can be a form of expressing your feelings. Like you said, it's especially higher within men. And a lot of the studies that I found show that men tend to bottle up their emotions more and not reach out for help more. So I think that digital self-harm is a form of them trying to get out emotions that they feel. And they have to do it in a safe place, and they have to do it in a way that's not really scaring anybody. Because if you text your best friend, hey, I want you to die, your best friend's gonna be like, dude, what the hell? But if you text yourself, I want you to die, it's safe with you, and you don't have to worry another person about that. So maybe it's a form of coping in therapy, a really messed up form of coping in therapy, but still a way where you can get those feelings out so that you don't have to bottle them up anymore. And that's the same with physical self-harm, with like cutting yourself or burning yourself or walking into roads without looking. It's just a form of getting your emotions out there and dealing with them, not in a productive way, but in a way that makes you feel better.
Yeah, and Christian, you said
Yeah, I
you
would
wanted
just
to
say,
tack onto that.
well, some of the people on our system can talk to teens. We do background checks on adults, and and so I talk to teens on our network. I mean, some of the people I've spoken to have struggled with cutting and other forms of self-harm. And if digital self-harm is really the equivalent of that, and I think it's an open question if it is, that's the right name for that, but let's see. I think what seems to me is that what's described as something like a compulsion or an addiction that gives relief. So it's more like like the addict to an opiate, like whatever the problems there are in their life, it boils down to, do they have a fix or not? It simplifies life, or it kind of like shuts off the noise. It's a focus. And I think self-harm for some teens it shuts off the sort of emotional noise and somehow focuses in a way that gives a lot of relief. And so what I think is potentially valuable there, and again, I don't know if digital self-harm partakes of these same things, is that it's a poor coping mechanism, but it's a coping mechanism.
Sure.
So that person is already on the track to trying to cope. If that can be turned, if they can learn more healthy ways to cope, if they can break a habit or replace it with a new habit, there's something to work with there.
Okay. And then I think our final question, to respect everybody's time before lunch, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing from your company or organization perspective? So Rachel, we can start with you with YouTube. So what type of challenges are you seeing from YouTube's perspective?
I think we know that we can always do more, and we want to do more. And the questions we ask ourselves are we sending people the right resources? How can we bring people together? And so things that always crop up when we're talking about this is, how do we reach the people that need us at the right time with the right messages? Being very respectful of people's privacy, and as I said, the vulnerable state that they're in. So it's kind of this balancing that I kind of mentioned about earlier. And that's something that I think we think about a lot when we're looking at our policies, we're talking with folks in the industry, and when we're rolling out new features.
Amanda, what about from your perspective and being maybe as an advocate for a lot of this work?
Well, from my perspective, a lot of kids are reluctant to seek help just because there's such a stigma around it, especially with teenagers right now. They're like, parents usually kind of turn them away and they're like, you're just being emotional right now, you're being defiant, you're being this or that. And it kind of prevents them from seeking out help. And that's really a thing that my app struggles with, is how do we get users to kind of let down their ego and let down their kind of prohibitions about what mental illness is, and how do we get them to talk about it and to learn about it and to deal with it in a productive way that they don't think is stupid or hurtful. And a lot of the problems that I personally have as an indie developer and that other companies that work with mental health might have is that there's not a lot of reach. Well, there is a lot of reach, but there's not usually a lot of budgeting to go around with funding and stuff. And it's definitely a struggle with marketing. It's like, get out there and find the people who need you without going person by person and looking through all of this other data that can be irrelevant. It can take 10 to 15 hours of your time just looking for someone who can help.
We're in San Francisco, so we can say, how do we scale that?
Yeah,
I think that's fine. So, Jeff, from your perspective, from after school.
By the way, when Amanda and I were texting this morning about both being in traffic, she said, "Oh, San Francisco is just LA, LA for geeks." So I think I touched on kind of two of the main challenges. One is figuring out the right way to engage with young people on these important issues in a way that resonates with them. It's cool, and they're not going to think you're lame and go to another network. And then, so that's something we're always trying to work on with our design. And the second is detecting troublesome or potentially troublesome behaviors or things that they talk about. And this goes to what Scotty said. I think we're getting much better at these integrations and learning, for example, like data from crisis text line, the users we send them, we're able to improve how we do that. Digital self-harm is one of these challenges because it is new, somewhat new to society in general, and it's complex and nuanced. So we will block messages, offer users the opportunity to connect with crisis text line. But we've seen that sometimes families will be unfamiliar with this issue. So I think spreading awareness of it is important. And then I'll just end with, I think, what we need to do on digital self-harm, along with some of these other issues, goes back to what Elias said, and that's essentially a call for more research. So the Cyberbullying Research Center did this survey, and it's within like the last 6 months they published this, but there's not much out there on it, and they're digging more deeply into it. So I think, you know, we are here for that reason, to put our minds together.
And I think that organization actually said they did that research because they couldn't find any other research. So maybe it shows you the lack and potentially the need for it. So Christian, what about from 7 Cups? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing there?
Well, I'd say it's for us, it's measuring outcomes, having a good sense of who we're helping and who helps, what interventions help, which sorts of people with which kinds of problems. A lot of it comes down to the data, studying it better, correlating it with other data out there and with other exchanges, consortia efforts and things like that. But I'd say broadly, as a product person, it's about getting beyond kind of Silicon Valley addiction type metrics, you know, like retention or growth for its own sake. I need to distinguish good from bad outcomes. So I care if people stay or they go. I need enough people to stay to keep the lights on, but I don't want people who stay for the wrong reason because they're like addicted and it's not helping them. And I need to be okay with people who leave for the right reason because they got the help they needed and they're not chronic. And I need to count that as a win and look at, because what you measure is what you optimize.
Sure. Yeah, that kind of gets into the ethical design, attention economy.
So it's not an externality, like we're just not throwing off waste like that, but actually including it in our model.
Sure, sure. And then Scotty, we'll end with you and then we'll go off to lunch. So
I think 2 main challenges, both that Amanda and Jeff have touched on here. First one's definitely scale. As a company, we did 1 million conversations in our first 3.5 years. We're going to do nearly 2 million in the next year. So it's tremendous growth, and what that really speaks to is penetration of mental health services across the country. It's exciting that we're destigmatizing the space. What that means is that there needs to be a much larger investment of resources in the servicing of these new communities who now have an awareness of the mental health space. Second challenge, I think, is breaking down barriers. We're all developed in these siloed spaces of social media companies, of crisis intervention, mental health research. If we're all going to work together and create a tight feedback loop, that means breaking down barriers of maybe when we might have a more adversarial relationship. Instead, it's working together. And I'll leave just on one more optimistic, uplifting note. On our platform, we find that 67% of texters share something with a counselor that they've never shared with anyone else before. I think there's a tremendous opportunity here in all the work that we're doing, and it's exciting that the space is moving in this direction. I think we should be tremendously optimistic that we're going to be able to fight these challenges, overcome them together, especially working as a united group.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming here and offering your insight. And again, for additional information on everybody's bio, please look in the program. So again, give everybody a warm round of applause here and go to lunch.